Hey guys, my name is Aldas and in today's video I'm going to be starting my Downfall of Williams series. Now this was a huge request from you guys. Literally almost every single comment was asking to do a Downfall of Williams series, so here it is. I just had to put it out if you guys wanted it. And yeah, this should be a good one. Now there's going to be a few key differences between this series and the Downfall of McLaren series. Now, the biggest difference will be is I won't be summarizing seasons because the Downfall of McLaren series was a very modern sort of Downfall of McLaren because I began in the first part talking about 2012. While here, I'm actually going to talk about in the first part the 1990s and where Williams were at their highest. In part 2, I will be talking about the 2000s era, and of course they were with BMW at the time. And then in part 3, the final part, I will be talking about the 2010s and obviously moving into the hybrid era as well, where we are now. So it will be a little bit different. It will be less summarizing the season and more talking about the decade or the era as a whole. And hopefully that will give a bit of a better summary and make the video a bit more cohesive and the story of Williams a little bit more tightly packed. So it will be less analyzing season by season. So yeah. But yeah, once again, if you enjoyed the series and everything I do on the channel, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video as well. That would be massively appreciated. And yeah, let's get into it. So like I said in the intro, I'm going to start part 1 in the 90s and the early 90s. Now, we know that Williams is such a historical Formula 1 team. It has had so much success, and statistically it is the third most successful Formula 1 team, behind of course Ferrari and McLaren. Their statistics are just incredible for what they've done. Out of the 710 race starts, they've had 7 drivers' titles, 9 constructors' titles, 114 victories, and 128 pole positions. And incredible statistics, amazing drivers, and a huge amount of history as well. Now, the 90s for Williams was a very interesting decade. It was their most successful period in Formula 1 ever, but it also had a lot of upsets as well, as we know. Now, we begin in the early 90s, and Williams at this point were really getting into their stride. This was sort of the time where the McLaren, Honda, Ayrton, Senna and Alain Prost sort of relationship started to fade away, the results started to fade away, and of course there was a bit of an internal fight between Alain Prost, Ron Dennis and Ayrton Senna, and of course he went to Ferrari, and that sort of little bit of turmoil just propelled Williams in the next couple of seasons to absolute dominance. Now, Williams had previous success before the early 90s. Of course, they've been race winners and, of course, won championships as well with people like Keke Rosberg and, of course, Alan Jones as well. Now, in 1992, Williams had one of the most astonishing seasons in Formula 1 ever. They had their 2-star drivers in Nigel Mansell, who was an F1 legend, and Riccardo Patrese, and they had one of the most famous Formula 1 cars in all of history, and of course it was the Williams FW14B. Now this car was powered by the Renault engine, and Williams were actually supplied by Honda in the 80s, but didn't find as much success as of course McLaren did. So they switched to Renault, and this was one of the most pivotal moments in their history, in my opinion, switching to the Renault engine. And then, of course, most importantly, it had active suspension and a very trick traction control system as well. Now, the active suspension was probably the most famous thing about that car in 1992 and was massively controversial. A couple years later, it was banned, of course, by the rule changes, just showing how innovative it was on that Williams. Now, I'm not 100% sure if Williams invented it. I'm sure someone in the comments can tell me. But it's basically a system that allowed them to electronically, with computers, control the car suspension mid-corner. And just to put it simply, it created a huge amount of downforce and made that car head and shoulders above the competition. And they just developed it so well into that car. And also, of course, traction control as well, which was also later banned. But that car, I mean, with the incredible drivers and Adrian Newey as well, who was at the team at the time, and we all know how good he is. I mean, he's found success even in the modern era. So yeah, with the fantastic pairing of Riccardo Patrese and Nigel Mansell for 92, and then Alain Prost and Damon Hill for 93, the 93 car was again a sort of a development of the 92 car, but was still head and shoulders above the rest. And those two seasons were incredible. In 92 and 93, Williams had won 20 of the 32 races, and they had gotten 30 out of the 32 pole positions. And as far as laps led, they led 74% of them in 2 years. So hugely dominant, and of course giving Nigel Mansell his first and only world title, and giving Alain Prost his 4th world title. So after 2 huge seasons for Williams where they had an incredible car, they came into the 1994 season and signed Ayrton Senna. Now, what was quite interesting is that obviously after Alain Prost won his 4th world title in 93, he had something very specific in his contract. After the whole McLaren issue, which it can be a completely separate video because that definitely deserves its own video. He had something in his contract that said he would not be on the same team as Ayrton Senna. So he decided to retire, and of course Williams signed Ayrton Senna to partner Damon Hill for the 1994 season. Now, in 1994, there was a very big technical rule shake-up banning the active suspension that had basically given this dominance to Williams over the past couple of years, banning the traction control, which was also very big for them, and ABS as well. This was in sort of trying to level the playing field and not make Williams the dominant force that they were, and make the sport a bit more human, as the FIA put it back in the day. Now, personally, I think this is a little bit unfair, to be honest. I mean, when we've got to realise is that active suspension, which is obviously what made the car of the 92-93 seasons incredible, it's such a feat of engineering, and it's almost like if these days they just banned whatever trick Mercedes had in 2014 and said, you have to start again. So I think it was very massively unfair for Williams, but it is what it is, I suppose, and it is all in the past. But obviously, for the 1994 season, with basically a completely fresh slate and Ayrton Senna now at the team, it was definitely a completely different picture. Now, the car during even pre-season and at the start of the season, before Ayrton's, of course, fatal accident, which we'll talk about in a second, it was quick. It didn't lose speed, but it was apparently the handling was very, very tricky. There just something was not right, and the car was definitely not as quick as it used to be. Now, despite this, in the first three races that Ayrton Senna did race in the 1994 season, he got pole position for both of them, but sadly had to retire on every single one of them before, of course, his fatal crash in San Marino at Imola in 1994. Now, this had not only a massive impact on the Formula One community and just Formula One and all around the world, but of course it did have a huge negative effect on Williams as a team. Now, it was a horrible weekend, and I'm sure everyone knows about it, but of course Ayrton Senna had a massive crash and sadly died as well. And also a quick fact, actually, every single Formula One car that Williams has produced since then has somewhere in the car a little memento of Ayrton Senna to remember him, so that's quite good. But yeah, that had a negative impact on the team, and it was absolutely horrible to see. And as far as what happened to Williams for the rest of the season, they ended up losing the Drivers' Championship by 1 point that season to Michael Schumacher in the Benetton, but they actually did win the Constructors with Damon Hill and then a combination of David Coulthard and Nigel Mansell coming in for a couple races as well. So it just shows that, despite the car maybe not being up to par at the start of the season, even though Ayrton Senna still managed to qualify pole position for the first 3 races, and of course the only 3 races that he raced that season sadly, it did develop far enough for them to be very competitive towards the end, and again lose out in the Drivers' Championship by only 1 point to Michael Schumacher. Now, in 1994 and 95, it was of course Michael Schumacher that won the Drivers' Championship, and deservedly so. This was of course the man who became the most successful Formula One driver of all time, and I think he really was the one that made the difference. That Benetton was a quick car, and there's no doubt about that, but the Williams was, maybe not as quick, but it was definitely a competitive car in those seasons. And it did well in the Constructors. They actually won the 1994 Constructors' Championship and came second in 1995. So it was a very good car, but I think Michael Schumacher in those 2 years was definitely was the one that made the difference. However, for 1996 and 97, it would be back to Williams' winning ways, with them winning the championship with both Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve. And a really good couple of years, actually. Lots of good fighting, and definitely interesting characters in terms of Jacques Villeneuve. And again, just building on the success that Williams had in the start of the 90s. I think a huge part of that was actually the move for Michael Schumacher to go to Ferrari. Now, the reason why I think that is actually quite a pivotal moment in Williams' history is because Michael Schumacher was the man who stopped them from winning 2 other world titles in 94 and 95. And him moving to Ferrari, I think he thought would be a step up, and again, even more world championships. But Ferrari actually wasn't as quick as Michael thought they would be. Of course, lots of reliability issues, very famously, although we know the dominance that they had in the 2000s. In Michael's early Ferrari career, there was lots of reliability issues and the car just not being up to par. And of course, Williams took full advantage of this and managed to win both the 96 and 97 World Championship. So Williams, in the span of 6 years, from 1992 to 1997, managed to win 5 Constructors' titles and 4 Drivers' titles, only being stopped by Michael Schumacher and Benetton. So this is where this episode will end. Now, you might have noticed that I haven't actually talked about a decline yet, and that's because I'm not going to in this first part, because In this first part, I wanted to tell the story of where Williams actually came from, just how dominant they were. I mean, they had an incredible sort of 90s period of dominance where they were the team to beat. And in part 2 and part 3, I will then start talking about their decline and how they went from being so dominant in Formula 1 to basically becoming backmarkers. But anyway, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this first episode of the downfall of Williams, and I hope you're looking forward to the next one as well. If you like the video, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and yeah, don't forget to comment in the box below of what you think and what you thought of this era of Williams from the mid-90s and their incredible drivers and their incredible cars as well. So yeah, don't forget to look forward to the next episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.